Welcome, good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever in the world you are. And welcome aboard. I think this is our 18th Space for Change over the last about 2.5 years. Hugo can probably count the numbers. We're a group that meets on LinkedIn, and we vote for topics of interest. And this topic today is all about leadership. Is it a crisis? Is it an opportunity? Is it a catalyst? So I'm very excited for this one, this topic being voted by you, for you. And thank you for being a part of our global community. We've got, and let's actually have a look at who's here today. Please jump in the chat, say hi, and let us know where in the world you're dialing in from. Are you in Sydney, in Australia? Are you in the US? I want to see who we've got here. Jump in the chat for me. We've got Sunshine Coast, Amanda. We've got Noah from Sydney, Roberta from Sydney. Hey, Greg, nice to see you in Sydney. We've got Jason in Melbourne. Michael is South Australia. Thank you, Michael. We've got Dave from Sydney, Elvira from Sydney. We've got Karen, is just outside of Melbourne. You should chat to Karen. She does amazing things with leadership and horses. It's a really cool program she's got. Michelle Tina, it's good to see you. She's in Sydney. JP's Western Sydney. Lots of Sydney people today. We've got Marjorie in Sydney, Mosley in Sydney. We've got Leonie in Melbourne. Oh, we got Bob in New Zealand. Welcome, Bob. Bob with the Change Cats. Donnay, good to see you again from sunny Brisbane. Julie, welcome from Scotland. That's amazing. Thank you for joining us. Aura is in Sydney. Anush from Sydney, good to see you. Anshu. We've got Leanne in New Zealand. Bris Vegas, good to see you again, Sally. We've got Central Coast over here. Late evening in Scotland, that's great. Bob, so mainly Australia, New Zealand, and Scotland today. Awesome. Well, welcome aboard. So great to have you. And let's get right into it. So I'm going to ask you, because our topic's about leadership, I want you to take a moment and think about one word to describe leadership where you worked more recently. And what we're going to do is we're going to just open up. If you grab your phone, scan that QR code or go to ahaslides.com/RNSC4. And let us know, what's that one word to describe how you feel about leadership, or what leadership's about for you at the last organization you worked in. What were they like? What's the word that describes them? So I see we've got 12 people, 13 people have jumped in. Passive. Wow, okay, this is good. And that's why we've done it anonymously, so you can just be real. Misaligned. Oh, some people have care. Split, ambiguous. Right, that's why we're here today. Disappointing, fearful. Some people have inspiring, which is fantastic. Unavailable, short vision. We see a lot of that. Incapable. Wow, that's a big one. All right, what else we got? Confused. I think most of us are confused in this new way of work, in this new world we find ourselves in. Hierarchical, fake. Wow, that's a powerful one as well. No empathy. Sure, incongruent. So that goes in with the misaligned. Wonderful. We're gonna share this out because this is a really good pulse check. Blind. They're not looking at data, it seems like it. Incongruent. What else? This word cloud just gets bigger and bigger. Awesome. Blind spots. So they can't see what they can't see because they're so focused in their blind spots. Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for your inputs. Some have visionary. So it's quite a mixed bag of chips there. There's, if we look at micro details is another one. But if we look at it, we've got some that are inspiring, some that are disjointed, some that are passive, but generally it's a mixed bag of chips, as we say. So very, very interesting word cloud there. I'll share in the LinkedIn group later, but thank you for your input. It's always good to kick off with that. So we did run some micro polls in the LinkedIn Space for Change group. And if you haven't joined, please join. It's called Space for Change. It's in LinkedIn, and it's where we vote for these topics before we come together. And also all our speakers come from this community as well. So if that's something you'd like to do in time. But we ran a couple of micro polls and we asked you, well, how do you feel about, how do your leaders make you feel? And it was actually really reassuring to see that 48% of our poll respondees said fantastic. But if we look on the left side, we had another 44% that was just sort of so-so or meh. And I never know what the others are because they never tell me what other is, but luckily it was only 8%. Maybe it means they are leaders. I don't know. And when we asked, well, if you asked for a topic around the crisis of leadership, we wanted to understand, well, who are we talking about? And it seems like our community really felt it was primarily executives and senior managers, then followed by management and team leaders. And notice how it sort of trickles down in a way, but there seems to be a lot of interest in what senior managers and executives are doing and what they're not doing. So that is what today is all about. And I'm very, very excited that we've got two incredible speakers. We've got Karen Ferris, who most of you would know on LinkedIn. She's very vocal about leadership, which I love. She's going to share a lot of stats as well, but also a little bit of hope, because this is also about a catalyst as well for good and what we need to be focusing on and what language we need to be thinking about when it comes to leadership. And then we've got the amazing Troy King, who I also met in Melbourne, down from Meta PM. And he heads up a change practice, but he is very interested in what the neuroscience says about leadership. And he's going to be looking at what business does versus what the neuroscience is actually telling us and giving us some good things. And if we've got time, I'm hoping to open this up to a Q&A so we can have a bit of a chat. But without further ado, I'd love to just dive right in. So, Karen, welcome aboard. Hope you're ready to rock and roll.
I am ready.
Love it. Over to you, Karen.
All right. I'll share my screen. All right, just confirm you can see that slide, crisis as a catalyst. Excellent. Okay, so, excuse me. So, yeah, I'm Karen Ferris, a organizational change man consultant based out of Melbourne, Australia. And as Andrew said, I want to share some data. It's okay, our gut saying to us, oh, leadership is terrible, it needs to change, it's not relevant, all those things that you put on that word slide. But what is the data actually telling us? So one of the things I want to think about or ask you to think about is leadership today, the leaders you see in front of you, is it fit for purpose? And the first data I'd like to share is from McKinsey. And they put out a report this year called The State of Organizations, and they surveyed 2,500 global business leaders. And they basically asked that question: are your leaders fit for purpose? So I want to ask you, and I want you to put this into the chat, of those 2,500 global business leaders, what percentage of them said their leaders were inspirational and fit for purpose? What percentage would you say the survey came up with? 20, 25, 50, less than 50, 10, 15, 35, 40, 10, 40, a real mixed bag coming through. Thank you so much. And 7%, Michelle. It's a worry, isn't it? Well, I'll tell you what, and of course, because it's a global survey, it would differ depending on the regions that people were voting in. 25%, so Anshu's just put up 26%, nearly spot on. Only 1/4 of people who responded said their leaders were inspirational and fit for purpose. That means that the leaders were engaged, passionate, and they could inspire employees to the best possible extent. So 3/4, 75% of our leaders today are not fit for purpose and do not inspire. So that's what the data is telling us. There's also data from a company called DDI, and you can see the numbers there in regard to their global leadership forecast this year. So a first sample of data. And they found that only 32% of employees trust senior leaders at their organization to do what is right. Trust is a big issue right now. And that, for me, is really scary. Only 46% trust their manager to do what is right, so their direct manager. Nearly half of employees. And only 40% report their company has high quality leaders. So McKinsey said 25%, and DDI are saying 40% have high quality, only 40% have high quality leaders. DDI also surveyed leaders to say, what percentage of you think these skills are critical? So as you can see here, 65% said identifying and developing future talent. And that is one of the CEO's big ticket items right now, is having that pipeline of future talent, being able to retain it and attract it. Strategic thinking. So stop thinking operational and tactical and think big picture. Managing successful change. We all want to see that one on there. That's a big tick. 63% said that's critical. Decision-making and prioritization, 63%, and 61% said influencing others is critical. But then we look at those leaders who've received any development or training in that area. 24%, 30, 29, 30, 28. You can see the gap for yourselves. So we've got a lack of development for leaders, and we'll come back to that point shortly. And what about one of the skills that is, I believe, is critical, and it was on that word slide that you all contributed to at the beginning, empathy. Empathy is absolutely, always has been, but we're talking about it a lot today. Empathy is so important for leaders, especially where we sit today. We've just come through the biggest disruption many of us have ever experienced through the pandemic. And we've all had different experiences out of that. And we need leaders today to be empathetic and understand what we've experienced, what we value, what our aspirations are, etc. And EY did an empathy in business survey, 1,000 employees, so not a massive sample, but nonetheless, more than half of the employees surveyed perceived corporate attempts at empathy to be inauthentic. So basically what they were saying, and it increased from 46% in 2022, so it's gone up. They're saying that leaders are talking about it, but not actually doing it, not following through. And that to me is a big, and again, a big trust issue. That if we hear people saying or pretending to be empathetic, but not following through, being inauthentic, then that's just erodes trust in your leadership. Business Solver did a state of workplace empathy 2022. So they surveyed 3,000 employees. And these figures are really scary to me. 79% of CEOs say they struggle to be empathetic. Now, I'd love to dive into that 79% and say, what is your struggle? What's the problem here? They struggle to be empathetic. And I think the next statistic probably explains that. 77% worry they will lose their respect if they're too empathetic. I mean, seriously, we're in 2023. We're talking about people-centric leadership. We've been talking about it for ages. And we've got 77% of our leaders, our CEOs, saying, if I'm too empathetic, you won't respect me. Seriously. that is really worrying and really scary. I'm just looking at the chat. I wonder if the lost respect worried about is from the peers or the employees. Good question. I don't know. Does it matter if they feel they lose respect? Yeah. Don't know. And what about leadership behavior? What is that telling us? So those of you who follow me and read my stuff and watch my videos will probably have seen this graph many times. So there's a company called Top 10 VPN. And at the beginning of 2020, they started to look at the global demand for employee surveillance software. So what you may call bossware, monitoring software on a global basis. And you can see from this graph that in March 2020, probably as we expected, not justified, but expected, it shot up. The demand, global demand for employee surveillance software went up by nearly 80% compared to the same time the previous year. So this was our bosses, our leaders, so-called leaders, saying, oh my God, I can't see them anymore. They're all working from home. I need to monitor what they're doing. And when we're talking about this surveillance, we're talking about monitoring keystrokes. Are you at your desk? Are you at your computer? What's your browser activity? What's your email activity? What's your GPS location? Where are you? Are you actually, out at the park or in the office, or what are you doing? And the scary thing for me from this is that employees immediately tried to stop the surveillance from happening. And very early on, it was very clear that if they plugged anything into the computer, because the software that will make your computer not turn off, that could be blocked. So apart from sticking a heavy weight on the keyboard or putting a paperclip in the insert key, they were coming up with all sorts of things like attaching the mouse to a desk fan. So as the desk fan moved backwards and forwards, the mouse moved backwards and forwards. If your child has a toy train, they could attach the mouse to the back of the train as it went around the track, and it just kept moving, so they could go and have lunch without worrying. All sorts of really scary, very innovative things. But that meant that our employees were spending time coming up with ways to avoid being monitored. They don't want the green light to go off on Teams or Skype or whatever it is, because bosses were saying, what are you doing? Now, as I said, in 2020 March, we had this spike, 80% increase compared to the previous year. I would have thought, yeah, okay, knee-jerk reaction. But look, it wasn't. I mean, it dropped in December 2020 and then increased throughout 2021. We had a drop again in 2022, but it's continued to spike and increase. And into 2023, it's going up again. What is going on? All this says to employees from a leader is, I do not trust you. That's it. That's what it's telling me. If you are monitoring me and using surveillance, it's saying you do not trust me to do the right thing. You do not trust me to deliver. And it also means that leaders, so-called leaders, are measuring the wrong things. It's not about hours at a desk. It's about outcomes and value delivered. So we're measuring the wrong things. That doesn't tell you anything about what the employee is actually delivering. So what else about leadership behavior? So again, many of you will know this is a passion of mine at the moment. I feel like I'm banging my head against the brick wall over and over again, that this mandate that we have, so-called leaders and executives saying, you need to be back in the office has absolutely no sense. People can, and I'm not saying we don't need the office, we need to think about it differently, because the way we relate to the office is very different than we did before March 2020. But saying to somebody, you must come back into the office 3 days a week. Why? If I could do what I do those 3 days from home and be more productive and higher quality work, whatever, why do I have a 2-hour commute just to do that in an office? Why are you saying to me I need to be in the office on a Wednesday, Thursday, whatever it is? It makes no sense. I need to be in the office if there's a purpose. If as an individual, that is my preference. If as a team, we decide that it makes sense to be in the office, to collaborate, to innovate, to brainstorm, whatever it might be, but it has to have a purpose, not just because it's a Wednesday. I have so many people telling me that they are demanded to go back to the office, and they sit there doing exactly what they could have done at home and save themselves time. And most employees are using the time they save on the commute to do work. They're using it for personal time as well, but they're also doing more work. So it's a benefit to the employer as well. Now, we've all read and we've all seen in the press all the reasons that these so-called leaders or bosses are demanding this return. Culture. Come on. Culture doesn't live in an office. Culture is a shared sense, a shared experiences, values, and beliefs. Now, I'll give you an example. I'm an avid Liverpool Football Club supporter, okay? And we have 103.1 million supporters. And we have a shared culture. We have the same beliefs, the same purpose, the same experience, and we sing the same songs. Liverpool's home ground, Anfield, holds 54,000 people. That's 0.05% of the whole supporters that ever get together in the same place. Yet we all have the same culture and the same shared beliefs and purpose. So you don't have to be co-located to have a great culture. And for those people saying you need to be back in the office for culture purposes, I would say you didn't have a good culture to start with. Collaboration. We can collaborate virtually. We don't need to be in the same place. Yes, we could decide that, I could say to Andrew and Hugo, and let's get together physically because we need to do some real deep dive thinking, and we'll co-locate to do that because it makes sense to do so. Fine. But we have the tools to do that digitally if we want to. And there are many companies that are totally virtual that collaborate really well. Productivity, that's the other big one. We have productivity paranoia, as Microsoft termed it, where we have bosses who are just so convinced that if they can't see you, you're not working. Now, I put it to you, and you know this, even if they could see you in an office, they didn't know you were working. You could have been on Facebook all day for all they knew. So it doesn't make any sense. It just begs disbelief. Innovation. Companies innovated. We had 2 years of a pandemic. These companies didn't stop innovating. Of course they did. They didn't stop collaborating. They carried on doing it. So saying that we need to get together to innovate, we might do it better if we're co-located, but we can innovate. And connection. I mean, really, if I walk into an office of thousands of people and I sit down surrounded by these people, does not mean I'm going to feel connected. I could feel totally isolated and alone. Connection is deliberate. It has to be, it's not just the fact that you're in the same proximity, you have to make it happen. So we can connect digitally. The tools are there today to do this. So the reason we're being demanded to go back to the office is because we have bad leadership or poor leadership. Blaming all these other things. It's just leaders saying, this is all too hard for me. I can't do this. I want to go back to how it was before March 2020. All that being said, we can't just point the finger at our bosses and say, you're bad. They do not get up in the morning, most of them, hopefully. And I'd say probably all of them, do not get up in the morning and saying, I want to be a bad boss today. I want to be the worst person I can be. They actually want to do the right thing. They actually want to be a good leader. They actually want to help people be the best they can be. And they want to move from that directive leadership, that command and control, to helping people by providing them with direction. But we have to enable that to happen. And the fact is that, and this is research from Jacob Morgan for his book, Future Leadership. And he said that most people that are put into a people leadership role, and we can have lots of different types of leadership, but people leadership is usually in their mid to late 20s. The first development they get is in the late 30s or early 40s. So that means for many, they've had over a decade leading people, being in charge of people without any support, coaching, or training. No wonder we've got a crisis. We need to give everyone in the organization access to leadership training. Not all of them will become people leaders, but that's okay. They don't need to be. The training will elevate their career, their self-esteem, and the engagement, but we have to invest, and we have to do it at the right time. In the late 30s, 40s, it's too late. So we have to help those leaders who had no support, no training, who are being directive and command and control because that's all they've known. And we need to enable them to have that light bulb moment. And I believe this is where the change team, the change community comes in, is having those conversations that has that light bulb moment that, yes, I need to change. And then acknowledge that this is a journey. This is going to take time. You're not going to go overnight and go, oh, I've gone from command and control to empowerment and enablement. It's a journey. And leaders will have to unlearn. And to say that to people is hard. You have to unlearn what you've known for all these years and relearn to do things differently. So just to wrap, what are the skills that I believe, and I know Troy will be sharing the same, if there was top 5 skills that leaders need today: empathy. They need to understand how people are feeling, and they need to act on that understanding. They need to create an environment of psychological safety where everyone feels safe to say what they think, to challenge, to ask questions without repercussion or reprimand. They need to be adaptive. There are certain times where you do need to be a directive leader. The building's on fire. We're not going to call a team meeting and say, oh, what do we do? They're going to direct people to go out of the nearest exit. But you need to adapt the leadership style for what's required. They need to empower. They need to stop doing and empower people to do the job as they see fit. And they need a growth mindset. As I've just mentioned, they need to learn, but they need to be prepared to unlearn and then relearn continually going forward. So they're my top 5. There's lots more, but that's me. So I'll call it there. I'll stop sharing, Andrew, and we'll hand over to Troy.
Amazing. Thank you, Karen. It's a good basis, and it really shows us and unpacks what that crisis is, because I think the word leadership crisis is such a it's such a baked-in word, but it's really nice to look at some real stats here and turn it into it. And I think there's a big learning opportunity here and a big opportunity for change leaders. So well done. Round of applause. And appreciate you as always, Karen. Troy, let's get you on the call. Troy, we met about a year ago. Hugo and I have obviously had many conversations with you around change, neuroscience, leadership. So thrilled to have you on board. And let's hear a little bit more about what business does versus what the science is telling us and where we're going with leadership.
Excuse me, I would love to. I can't share screens at the moment. Hi, Karen.
Hi, Troy.
I'll make you co-host. Go for it.
There we go. That's looking much better. You should be able to see a lovely dial on your screen with Daniel Pink. That's what we're seeing. Fantastic. Yep. So I think, this sort of very clear statement, there's a mismatch between what science knows and what business does. Karen's figures there, some of those are quite scary, aren't they, in reality, about how disconnected so many leaders are, or the lack of trust, the cultural issues that we're facing there. So I think in some of Daniel Pink's work, if no doubt a number of you are familiar with it, but that command and control structure, that old school way of thinking, and even the reward versus punishment sort of side of things is just, the science shows it just does not work. So this bossware component, there's so many things that are absolutely adverse from a neuroscience perspective and from a psychological safety perspective. And I think this wonderful thing that, when I first came across a lot of Daniel's work very early on, I just had so many aha moments of going, yes, that's what I thought. And it comes down to that unseen intrinsic value, and you might have seen some of his earlier work around the drive, about what motivates us, around mastery, accountability, purpose. People need to have something of value. They need to know that what they're doing matters. And I think that's where, some of the conversations in the chat around whether or not we come back to the office about having a purpose around what those activities are. There's some wonderful things. If you've got a great culture and you've got a great office, you can accomplish wonderful things, and the camaraderie. Yes, there's some wonderful benefits about that teamwork and that culture, but not doing it for its own sake, but having some reasoning behind that is a really important thing. Now, Karen's sort of really spoken quite a lot about, talking about some of those leadership issues and where we see, the definition of, is there a leadership crisis? I think that's certainly true. But what if we were to bring that back down to something quite simple? And this sort of leads me into all of the neuroscience around leadership. And I want to sort of flip the script a little bit here and sort of bring it back to yourself as a leader. Now, you might not be in charge of, dozens or hundreds of people, but we all have the ability to create leadership within the cultures that we are, whether we're the mental health leader, whether we're the change leader, whether we're just showing an example. I think in Andrew's example of, how do we create a movement? It's all around, stepping into that. So if we were to come back to one individual question, and if you saw the little lead up video that I did, and I'm just going to have a quick look at the chat there. One simple question: how do you feel after you've met with your boss? The single biggest indicator of a leader's performance comes down to that one question. So just for a quick bit of interaction, let's take a very aspirational view of leadership. How would you like people to feel after they've met with you? Throw a few words in the chat box, and or maybe it's maybe sometimes you haven't quite got it right, and people didn't quite feel as good. So supported, energized, inspired, calm, mirror neurons. Oh, I see, now you're talking my language. I love it. That's fantastic. motivated, inspired, supported, wonderful things. And we certainly all and reinvigorated and appreciated. Yes, that's a key one there. And safe is also really critical. So all of these things are really important, and I really encourage you, as a bit of a takeaway, Brandon Smith's TED Talk, if you haven't already seen it, on emotion contagions. He actually has some wonderful, simple little catalysts that you can take away. He talks about, thinking about emotions in the workplace as, like a virus, and you can be a booster shot for emotional intelligence within the office. And I'll give you a little tip right at the end about something that you can do from a simple perspective. So thank you for your replies there. I love all of those. Heard is a really good one, and empowered critical. So why is that how we feel a really important component? It comes down to, from a neuroscience perspective, this bias that we have around in-group and out-group bias is one of the most hardwired biases that we have within our brains, and it affects so many of our decisions, especially when it comes to workplace, when it comes to relationships, because it all comes down to who do we trust and who don't we trust. Now, if we've got bossware coming in and trying to monitor whether we're touching a keyboard, you're pretty much guaranteeing that all of your staff will put you into the out group. They will not trust you because you do not trust them as a leader. So it's actually having the reverse impact that is desired. It's not motivating someone, that's for sure. It's going to disengage them. But this concept of in-group is so important because this is who we trust. This is who we want to spend our time with. This is, if we want to go to the office, these are the people we want to be with, because we share successes. We love to collaborate. We love to challenge each other, and we celebrate challenging each other because we trust that person. This is a really important component of it. But if we think back to out-group and the beginnings of humanity and tribes, if there's a vicious lion or tiger coming to attack the tribe, do we want that tiger to succeed? Well, no, we want it to fail. So our out group, their failure is our success. And from a change management perspective, we see this all the time where we have resistors and people resisting things. It's actually because they're sabotaging. There's something that hasn't occurred for them to trust the change that is coming. They have some fear. This is a survival mechanism. They're hardwired to protect themselves. So as leaders, we need to be curious about this. Now, oftentimes we see in project worlds where someone challenges, oh, I don't like the way that you've configured that. Oh, that's never going to work. And they throw hand grenades at us, maybe in a workshop. Sometimes we can allow our ego about our work in this project, and we've done so much thinking and they just don't understand. Well, we're creating an out-group disconnection with those people who are offering us feedback. As a leader, this is where some of the catalysts around understanding in-group, out-group can come in play, in that we can go, okay, what is it that they're afraid of? Can I ask a few more questions? Can I get curious about what it is? How can I work with them to build some trust, bring them in to be part of that? And I think some of the ways, in agile ways of working, and cadences about bringing subject matter experts in, helping them evolve the user stories and things, this is something that we can celebrate and bring them in to be part of it, so that we can build their trust, but also get this different style of thinking that maybe is outside of our lens that could make the end product a little bit more robust and a little bit better. So there's things that we need to do from a self-monitoring perspective. Now, this is the other really important part to understand. When we do have this in-group, out-group bias, how does that affect us? When we're being treated poorly by leadership, or when someone in a room, we've all been in a boardroom where someone has been attacked or something a little bit nasty has been said, and we see that person being affected. Maybe they're part of our in-group. What's going to happen at that point? It's not just that person themselves that are going to go into a stress affect, that flight, fight, freeze or faint response. Everyone in the room, their blood pressure will raise. They will also, as the mention of mirror neurons will mentioned before, everyone will go into that impact. What happens at that point? Well, you can't be creative. When you're in stress affect, it's extremely rare, especially for neurotypicals, to be able to then problem solve and to be creative. So unless that issue is dealt with in an emotionally intelligent and caring and trustful way, that if that meeting was all about solving a problem or being creative, I'm sorry, but that's off the cards. So part of monitoring ourselves and understanding the fact that, so some of these studies, so back in 2003, it was some of the first neuroimaging studies around the correlation between physical pain and social pain. Now, the same areas are associated within the brain when it comes to what causes distress. So the brain doesn't see any difference between social rejection, harassment, bullying, than it does to an actual physical cut or broken bone. There's still a cortisol release. There's still the fear. There's still the stress that occurs within that signaling. And so understanding this from a leadership perspective this is where it comes down to us in order to be able to create a psychologically safe and a trustful environment. Now, Andrew, while I'm presenting, I see there's a few comments coming through. Is there anything there that I need to jump on?
Oh, no, just some really good personal shares. I know Michelle's obviously come in and talking about social pain. Michael's speaking about a leader who just says, I don't do emotions, and just sort of cuts that out. And it's quite baffling. So, and then Anshu's talking about selection theory and how leaders work that. So mainly just responses there. So thank you.
Lovely. And wonderful responses. And Michelle, you're all over it. Yes, social pain does hurt. Now, I don't need to sort of spend a huge amount of time on this slide, but I think it's a very simple but very illustrative, component around. And I use this illustration whether it comes down to change management, whether it comes down to organisations, but I think it really fits from an old school way of looking at leadership, of that top down, that silo, that org chart sort of style view, versus what it actually is. Organisations are far more like organisms, and so from a leadership perspective, we need to understand that as well. Where we pull on one thread, the impacts of that can go wide and far. So it's not just the immediate person that might be under our purview. It might be a whole lot of others. When it comes to delivering projects, we can pull on one thing and affect so many others. So I like this little illustration, in that it is a bit of an organisation, and you might think that this big this circle in the middle might be the CEO, and they're the most important person that we have to influence. But actually, no, it might be the executive assistant to the CEO that really has the power from a leadership perspective and from a change perspective and from a getting things done, because of the relationships and the connections that they have. They're the person that we can utilise to be able to create influence. So understanding where we can impact and help others, just thinking that is more of a bit of a spider web or organism sort of style way. Let's come back to a little quick interaction before I come down to some of the really key points that I wanted to leave you with today. If you were to think about some of the qualities that you either need to display as a leader, or that you want people in your team to display. So we talked in some of the information earlier around, it's not always just, we might have fantastic leaders, but a bit of a shitty team, or we might have a really amazing team and a bit of a shitty leader. So what are some of the qualities? Just throw a few sort of random words in that come to mind in the chat box about a particular quality that you think is needed for either great leaders or for great team members. Trust, vulnerability. I love that one. That's really important. Collaborative team dynamics, listening. Trust, wonderful to see that coming up as a reoccurring theme. Having each other's backs. Yes, Andrew, absolutely. Empathy, beautiful. And those are really important. If you're familiar with some of Simon Sinek's work, we might have a really high performer in our team, but just got that ugly personality and no one really wants to be in the same room with them. Are they a great team member? Well, they're fantastic at what they do, but they're a bit of a, Or do we have maybe a medium performer within our team? Yeah, okay, there's probably some skills to be learned about the particular thing that we've hired them to do, but They are the type of person that if you were to go away, you would leave your wonderful pet or your children with them because you trust them that much. Which one is more important in your team? You'd want to have it the person that you trust, wouldn't you? And so Simon Sinek talks about this. The Navy SEALs understood that a high-performing, amazing leader that no one trusts, that's the building block of a toxic environment. And we had some mention before there in the chat box that sometimes people think that they're the most wonderful and knowledgeable person in the room and they overwrite everyone. And I think the article from Harvard's Business Review, that was the opening illustration, that as they became more powerful, they sort of inadvertently took over the room. So I think that self-awareness, that empathy, humility, Stephanie, yes, beautiful points, really, really important. So having that trust component is absolutely key. So there's a phrase that I coined a number of years back, and this happened to be when I was leading a couple of different teams and of network engineers and of accountants, and I had a couple of staff that were really low quality performers, and they weren't motivated, they weren't inspired. We joked that they had a little black book of excuses. Oh, I got a flat tire. Oh, I locked my keys out of the house. Oh, I've had this, I've had that. And then over a few months, it would circle back to the same excuses starting from the top. And there were some challenges in getting them motivated to get some things done. And the trouble was that they would go into the environments and do some setup first, and then I would have my other really amazing and self-assured and self-motivated staff come in to accomplish things, but many of the basics hadn't occurred. And I started to realize that the real importance of the nature within a team around this, what I termed symbiotic synergy. And this symbiosis is that real importance within team dynamics about having mutually beneficial relationships. We had the comment before about having each other's back. That is a really important when you've been a part of a utopia of high performing teams. You'll notice that is one of the real core components of that team. But recognizing individual strengths, knowing that there's some people who might be absolutely amazing at doing spreadsheets, but they're pretty bad when it comes to visuals and communicating messages in PowerPoint. But over here, you've got someone who's meant to do those visuals, but they're stuck on doing the budgets in the spreadsheets, and they hate doing spreadsheets. So why are we using the two people in roles that are different to their own strengths? Is there ways that we can have some complementary roles sort of coming in? And I always sort of talk about this from a business analyst and a change management perspective. They're the two sides of the one coin. The business analyst is doing the business or the technical processes that we're understanding between current and future state. As change managers, we're coming in and we're looking at how is these changes going to impact these team members, or what are the resistance or the behavioral things? Do I mitigate that with communications? Do I mitigate that with training? How do I work with that? And so having that complementary roles is really important, but collaborative decision making where you can try to expand on some things and try to bring all of the different strengths and to listen to those voices, make sure that everyone has those voices in the room. So then we come into synergy where the sum of the whole is greater or different to the sum of the individual parts. And I think the shared vision is really key, but I think also celebrating the safety of throwing any idea into the mix, because sometimes we have really crappy ideas, but those are the ones that we iterate on that become wonderful ideas. And let's celebrate the great ideas that come straight off the back, and there's these wonderful aha moments. But let's make sure that there's a safe environment for all of those to come to the core. Effectively communicate and collaborate within that. And Karen mentioned that that growth mindset, which is very much around sharing, learning and understanding, but it might be a fairly goal-driven for the leader themselves on a bit of an agenda. Benefits mindset takes that even a step further, where there's that shared vision and that shared idea and that shared learning where everyone is leaning in and having each other's backs. So that growth and benefits mindset is really important, but understanding not everyone's going to be that. And sometimes a fixed mindset is also a valued voice in the room, because they can be very risk averse and bring us, very optimistic people a bit back down to earth. And and I think I think Anna's a little bit of that for you, isn't she, Andrew? And she's I've had the privilege of witnessing that in some of our collaborative meetings, and she's kept us all to task, and it's wonderful to have those voices in the room that do that for us. So
yeah, Anna just calls it. Hey, this is why I love you, Anna.
yes, absolutely fantastic. Some great comments coming in there. Thank you. So if I was to wrap it up in a bit of a top 5, and in the spirit of having some slightly different divergent things, but some very similar things to Karen, I think absolutely psychological safety and trust, those are the key foundations of any high-performing team and any good quality leader. We must have those things. If we want creativity and we want performance, the brain actually absolutely needs that safety. So whether that's working remotely, whether that's working together physically within a team and having a purpose around that, making sure that it's much more about the emotional intelligence and the safety that people are feeling. So be a bit of a triage when it comes to mental health within your organisation to be able to support that. But if we're going to do that, the most important thing is that we're a bit of a scientist of our own experiment, and that we're very focused on what we can and do within our organisations, but within those meetings, etc., ourselves, to monitor if someone is behaving badly, then to take a breath, take a moment, realise that we might be going into that stress affect, that flight, fight, freeze or faint response. In old language, we used to call that sort of limbic arousal or amygdala hijack. We know now that it's a whole of brain experience. So understand whether you're going to react in a very fast and error-prone emotional response, or whether you're going to respond in a far more considered, far more prefrontal cortex type 2 sort of processing, which is thinking about the cost benefits around, if I respond this way, what's going to happen? How can I bring this back into an emotionally intelligent way? So part of great quality leadership is about focusing on how we can present ourselves better. We spoke about a few aspirational words about being a great leader. I know in one instance, I had this very technical go live that I was trying to accomplish, and it was all, we had all of these moving parts, and I was going, oh, what do I do with this? And how are we going to be able to get this done in time? And I came into a meeting with all the staff. I said, okay, we really want plan A, but in the timeframes with this vendor, we might not be able to get that done before go live. So plan B is probably our most realistic thing. But if it all falls apart, then we've at least got plan C. So I'm thinking I'm great, I'm flexible, I'm agile, I've got plan A, B, and C. All right, go, let's go, team. And we walked out of that meeting, and I thought I'd done a great job. But what actually happened was that the team were feeling confused. They didn't know, so which one are we doing? And I'd lost the component of what they wanted. Some certainty, they wanted some very specific direction. I was very comfortable in the uncertainty because I knew that we had these options and I had a great team that could support me. So sometimes we need to just self-regulate a little bit and ask for a little bit of real feedback on those things. And I think that's where empathy as a superpower is really important, and being that emotional booster shot for others within our organization, that's the thing that really brings people along for the journey. And Michelle, absolutely, understanding no two brains are alike. Loving that neuro capability sort of speech that we go, if we've got that long-term exposure to stress, we go into allostatic load, and it changes the architecture of the brain. And so that's where we need this empathy as a superpower. Human-centered design, that's obviously all about what Earth to Mars bring to the table, so I probably don't need to explain too much about the benefits of that, but this is that reinforcing power of all of those human elements in the room. These aren't just assets for us to utilize as leaders. These are real humans that have real other things going on. And if we accept the human and all of their things as leaders, then we bring them along for the journey. I had a wonderful experience just the other day where one of my staff came up to me and said, listen, I know this isn't a business question, but I've got a personal thing that I'm just really not sure how to deal with. I'm trying to do this, and can you give me some guidance on that? And I felt that was he sort of felt a little bit, am I crossing a boundary here? I'm going, no, dude, that's what we're here for. We're here to help each other through these things. So I love that. And from a synergistic perspective, when we talk about, collaboration and bringing in all of the elements in the room to add to a bigger result in the end. There's one thing from that TED talk around emotion contagions that I think is really important, and that is try to have far more positive interactions than you do negative interactions. So Brandon talks about having a 3-to-1 positive versus negative interaction. What's our catalyst to walk away with? Come in, say happy Thursday to everyone, great greetings. They're very simple things that we can do, but keeping that positivity, because the science actually shows that in high performing teams and high performing relationships, there's actually a 5-to-1 positive to negative interaction ratio, which I think is an amazing figure to understand, but it's so simple when we think about what we can do. So what does that all come down to? Let's just be excellent to each other. I think that's really, Jason's seen this slide before in one of my presentations. But I think it's just such an important one that, if this is our go-to thing, if we're treating people as humans and with the respect that they deserve, then so many other things come along for the journey, and we can solve that if we've got that psychological safety and trust, because that's the foundation of it all. So there we go.
Amazing. Thank you. Round of applause for Troy. So much in there. I think very practical, a lot of great chats. I guess to end off, I think a lot of what you guys were saying was so linked to what we're seeing with the data. Now, we've been obviously training a lot of change leaders. We've been working with organizations across industries. And, what does this mean for change leaders? Because a lot of our audience works in transformation, change, all of this kind of stuff. And we're literally seeing that change now needs, and someone mentioned it in the comments, that change now needs to be that good example. Because if all these executives are battling with empathy, we can almost be that connector. But what we're finding is the skill of the future change is actually getting out of templates, getting out of the tools, getting out of these linear approaches to change from back in the 80s. And really, firstly, looking at the power of co-design. And it's not necessarily watching an hour video on human-centered design and putting some post-its up. It's actually having confidence to co-create things with your employees, with teams, and with leaders in the room. And the power of that with that in-group stuff you mentioned, Troy, is just phenomenal. And we're finding a lot of people aren't really that confident at this point. So I think it's a really good one to include people in there. The second skill for the future and now is obviously digital muscle, because as Karen said, teams are not going to be all in the office or all at home. There's probably going to be a hybrid. There's each organization is going to work it out themselves. So building that digital muscle and knowing how to facilitate, how to lead in a digital context is becoming key. And we love that kind of stuff because our clients are all over the world. And the third is all those interpersonal skills. How do you question? How do you hold psychological safety? What are those conscious and those subconscious things that we need to be aware of personally to do that? And what I do want to impart to the group is, if you are feeling like one of these areas you want to grow, or it's not an area of confidence, please don't suffer in silence. Please reach out to myself. Please reach out to Hugo, Anna, anybody on this call. We can help you. We've helped a lot of change leaders within organizations and independent ones without organizations. We offer coaching. We've got on-demand programs in terms of design thinking. And a few of you I can see have joined our accelerator. So we've got our US one coming in August. We only run them twice a year. And we've got our September one coming in of the Australian timeline. So we'd love to have you a part of that. And obviously have a chat to us first to see what's a fit. But we're very passionate about building this leadership skill, because I don't think we want to keep going on the way things are going on and keep seeing these stats and issues that are happening in businesses. So guys, I'd like to end off. You will be getting snackable highlights, so watch your email. Check out our website if you want to catch up on past Space for Changes. There's about 17 episodes there. And if you haven't joined Space for Change, please join our group and let's vote for the next topic. So if you could just jump in the chat for me, what was your one aha, your one best thing, your one takeaway from today? And I'd like to just wrap up with that quick reflection. Wow. Thanks for the insights, great content, fantastic as always. Thank you, Karen, Troy, and Andrea, and the rest of the crew. Elvira loved it. Highly recommend the courses. Thanks, Leonie. Well worth it. Thanks, Perrin. A breath of fresh air. Thank you for that, Stephanie, all the way in Canada. Amazing. What was your takeaway? So many nuggets. The stats from Karen about leaders, really good. Too many leaders reverting to surveillance. Thanks, Greg. I think that's something we need to have conversations about. CEOs feeling less empathetic and might lose power. That was a big one. Catherine said incompetence of leaders. Amazing. Lots of thanks, lots of joy. Well, folks, we send you forth. Go out into the world. Thanks, Michael. Sorry for animal packs, dogs versus tiger and synergistic. Wow, there's more coming in. Symbiosis plus synergy. Good to see the challenges are shared. I think that was my best part of today, that we're all feeling the same thing. This isn't a myth. This is a real thing and why we've voted for it. All right, folks, thank you for your time. Thank you for joining us, and jump into Space for Change when you can, and let's start working on our next topic. Have an interstellar week, and all the best from us and the crew at Earth to Mars. And big thanks to Karen and Troy.